In the heart of bustling New York City, inside a brightly lit television studio, the energy was electric. The set of The View buzzed with anticipation as the crew prepared for another episode filled with lively discussions and entertaining guests. Whoopi Goldberg, one of the show's beloved hosts, sat comfortably in her chair, exuding her signature charm and wit. Known for her quick humor and ability to tackle any topic, she had become a household name. Today, however, the audience was in for something different. A guest who stood out not just because of his personality, but also because of his striking appearance. As the cameras rolled and the theme music played, the audience erupted into applause. The first few minutes of the show were dedicated to lighthearted banter among the co-hosts, setting the tone for what promised to be an engaging episode. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the introduction of the day's special guest. Walking onto the stage with measured steps was Captain James Whittaker, a member of the British Royal Guard. Clad in his iconic red tunic and towering bearskin hat, he looked every bit the part of a soldier from a storybook. His presence commanded attention, and the audience couldn't help but cheer enthusiastically. Whoopi, ever the entertainer, wasted no time in breaking the ice. With a playful grin, she gestured toward Captain Whittaker and said, "Wow, you're taller than I expected. And that hat? How do you even keep your balance with all that weight on your head?" Her comment drew laughter from both the audience and her fellow co-hosts. Captain Whittaker, maintaining his composure, gave a slight nod and replied politely, "Years of practice, ma'am." This exchange set the tone for the segment. Whoopi's curiosity about the Royal Guard quickly turned into playful teasing. She leaned forward in her chair, resting her elbows on the table, and asked, "So let me get this straight. You guys are supposed to stand completely still, right? No blinking, no moving, no scratching if you've got an itch. How does anyone even survive that?" The audience chuckled, clearly enjoying the lighthearted ribbing. Captain Whittaker responded with a small smile, explaining that discipline was key to his role. "It's not easy," he admitted, "but it's a privilege to serve." Despite his calm demeanor, Whoopi wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. She mimicked his rigid posture, pretending to stiffen her back and widen her eyes dramatically. "Like this?" she joked, making the audience roar with laughter. "No wonder people take pictures of you. It's like seeing a real-life statue." Her antics brought a chuckle from the other co-hosts, who joined in the fun by asking their own humorous questions. One of them quipped, "Do they teach you how to breathe without moving your chest?" Another added, "What happens if a pigeon lands on your shoulder? Do you just pretend it's not there?" Throughout it all, Captain Whittaker remained unfazed. His stoic expression never wavered, which only encouraged Whoopi to push further. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms playfully, and said, "I have to ask, are you even human? Or did the Queen send over some kind of robot disguised as a guard?" This remark sent the audience into fits of laughter once again. Some members clapped their hands, while others wiped away tears of mirth. Even the production crew behind the scenes found themselves grinning at the absurdity of the situation. But beneath the surface, there was more to Captain Whittaker than met the eye. While he appeared to be the perfect picture of discipline and decorum, his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion, a subtle hint that he was fully aware of the jokes being made at his expense. Yet, instead of showing frustration or embarrassment, he chose to embrace the moment with grace. When given the chance to speak, he shared brief insights into his life as a Royal Guard, mentioning the rigorous training and long hours required to perform his duties. However, his responses were always concise and delivered with a quiet confidence that left the audience intrigued. Whoopi, sensing that there might be more depth to her guest than initially assumed, decided to dig a little deeper, but not before cracking one last joke. "You know," she said, leaning closer to the microphone, "if you ever need tips on loosening up, I could give you some pointers. Maybe start with a good belly laugh? Or is that against the rules too?" The audience laughed yet again, but this time there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. It was as though everyone collectively realized that perhaps they'd taken the teasing a step too far. Even so, the segment continued, with Whoopi steering the conversation toward lighter topics. She asked Captain Whittaker about his favorite moments serving as a guard, whether he'd met any celebrities and if he ever got tired of wearing the heavy uniform. Each question was met with polite answers, often accompanied by anecdotes that painted a clearer picture of the man behind the uniform. By the end of the initial exchange, it was clear that while Whoopi's humor had set the stage for entertainment, there was much more to Captain Whitaker's story, and the audience was eager to hear it. Little did anyone know, the most memorable part of the interview was still to come. For now, the playful dynamic between Whoopi and Captain Whitaker kept the energy high, ensuring that no one in the studio, or watching from home, could look away. The combination of humor, curiosity, and the undeniable charisma of both host and guest created a captivating opening act. And as the first segment drew to a close, the audience was left wondering, what would happen next? Would Captain Whitaker continue to endure the jokes with patience, or would he reveal something unexpected that would change the tone entirely? Only time would tell. As the interview progressed, the playful banter between Whoopi and Captain James Whitaker continued to dominate the conversation. The audience was thoroughly entertained, their laughter echoing through the studio with each new joke. Whoopi, ever the master of comedic timing, seemed determined to push the boundaries of humor even further. She leaned forward in her chair, resting her chin on her hand, and asked with a mischievous grin, "So, Captain, do they duct tape you into that position? Because honestly, I don't see how anyone can stand that still without some kind of secret trick." The audience erupted into laughter once again, clearly enjoying the light-hearted teasing. Whitaker, however, maintained his composure, responding with a polite smile. "No duct tape required, ma'am," he said calmly. "Just years of training and focus." His answer only fueled Whoopi's determination to uncover the mystery behind his stoic demeanor. With a twinkle in her eye, she pressed on. "Focus, huh? That must be why you haven't cracked a smile yet. Do you even know how to laugh? Or is that against the rules, too?" This remark drew another wave of giggles from the crowd, but it also marked a subtle shift in the tone of the segment. While Whoopi's comments were clearly meant in jest, there was an underlying assumption that perhaps Whitaker lacked personality or emotion beneath his disciplined exterior. Sensing an opportunity to dig deeper, she turned to the audience and joked, "I think we might need to send him to clown school after this. Maybe teach him how to juggle while standing guard?" The room filled with laughter yet again, but this time there was a faint undertone of discomfort creeping in. Whoopi wasn't done yet. She shifted gears slightly, asking more pointed questions about the challenges of being a royal guard. "What happens if you sneeze during duty?" she quipped, pretending to cover her mouth dramatically. "Do they send you to some secret royal jail for ruining the vibe?" The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether to interpret the question as pure comedy or a jab at the perceived rigidity of his role. Whitaker responded with his usual calmness, explaining that guards were allowed to step aside briefly if necessary, but always within strict protocol. Despite his polite answers, Whoopi persisted, her playful tone now bordering on relentless. She gestured toward his towering bearskin hat and said, "And what about this thing? Does it come with a warning label that says, 'Do not remove under any circumstances'? Or is it glued to your head?" The audience chuckled, though a few members exchanged glances, sensing that the line between harmless fun and mockery was growing thinner by the moment. Even the other co-hosts seemed hesitant to join in, offering only polite smiles instead of their earlier enthusiastic participation. Captain Whitaker remained unfazed, his expression unchanged. However, those paying close attention could detect a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps a hint of frustration or simply a quiet resolve. He listened patiently as Whoopi launched into another round of jokes, this time suggesting that he might not even have feelings under all that formality. "You're like a real-life mannequin," she exclaimed, eliciting scattered laughter from the audience. "Do you eat lunch in that uniform, or does someone roll you into a closet when it's time to recharge?" At this point, the mood in the studio began to shift noticeably. Some members of the audience looked uneasy, glancing around to gauge others' reactions. A few crew members backstage exchanged worried looks, wondering if the segment was veering into uncomfortable territory. Yet, despite the growing tension, Whitaker continued to respond graciously, never raising his voice or showing signs of irritation. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the escalating antics unfolding before him. Whoopi, oblivious to the subtle changes in the atmosphere, decided to take things one step further. Leaning back in her chair, she crossed her arms and declared, "Honestly, I bet you don't even have hobbies outside of standing perfectly still. Do you go home and practice looking serious in the mirror? Or maybe binge-watch Netflix while sitting ramrod straight?" This final comment drew a mix of laughs and awkward silence from the audience. It was clear that the joke had gone too far, straddling the fine line between playful teasing and outright ridicule. For the first time since the interview began, the energy in the studio dipped. The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable hush. Even Whoopi seemed to sense that she may have crossed a boundary, though she tried to mask it with a forced chuckle. The camera panned to Whitaker, who sat motionless, his gaze steady and unwavering. For a brief moment, the entire room held its breath, waiting to see how he would respond. Then, in a voice so calm and measured that it commanded immediate attention, Whitaker spoke. "Ma'am," he began, his words carrying a weight that silenced the room entirely. "I've stood watch through freezing winters and scorching summers. I've endured countless hours without rest, shielding those who cannot shield themselves. And yes, Ms. Goldberg, I do laugh, but only after ensuring the safety and dignity of my countrymen." The impact of his statement was immediate. The audience froze, stunned by the sudden gravity of his words. Whoopi herself appeared taken aback, her playful demeanor melting away as she realized the depth of what he had just shared. In that moment, the playful teasing transformed into something far more profound, a reminder of the sacrifices and discipline that often went unnoticed behind symbols of tradition and power. Though the segment was far from over, the tone had irrevocably changed. What had started as a lighthearted exchange had evolved into a poignant reflection on respect, service, and the unseen efforts of individuals like Captain Whitaker. As the audience absorbed his words, the studio fell silent, not out of boredom, but out of reverence for the man seated before them. And though no one knew it yet, this moment would become the turning point of the entire interview, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The silence that followed Captain James Whitaker's measured response was profound. For a moment it felt as though time had stopped in the studio. The playful energy that had dominated the segment just moments earlier evaporated, replaced by an atmosphere heavy with reflection. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been riding high on her comedic wave, suddenly found herself at a crossroads. Her usual confidence wavered slightly as she processed the weight of Whitaker's words. "I've stood watch through freezing winters and scorching summers," he had said, his voice steady and resonant. "I've endured countless hours without rest, shielding those who cannot shield themselves." These weren't rehearsed lines or polished sound bites. They were raw truths delivered with quiet authority. Whitaker paused briefly, allowing his words to settle over the audience before continuing. "And yes, Ms. Goldberg, I do laugh, but only after ensuring the safety and dignity of my countrymen." The room remained eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the studio lights above. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath, capturing every nuance of this unexpected turn. Whoopi sat motionless, her expression softening as she absorbed the gravity of what Whitaker had shared. Gone was the mischievous glint in her eye, replaced by something more thoughtful, a mix of surprise, respect, and perhaps even a touch of guilt. The audience, too, was visibly moved. Some leaned forward in their seats, hanging onto every word, while others exchanged knowing glances, realizing that they had underestimated the man sitting before them. Sensing the shift in tone, Whitaker now took the opportunity to elaborate further. He began sharing stories from his years of service, moments that highlighted not only the discipline required of a royal guard, but also the humanity behind the uniform. "People often see us as statues," he explained, his voice warm yet firm. "But we're people first. We have families, dreams, and fears like anyone else. The difference is that we choose to put those things aside temporarily to serve a greater purpose." He recounted a particularly poignant memory, one that left a lasting impression on him early in his career. There was a young boy who came to visit Buckingham Palace with his family, Whitaker recalled. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. As he walked past me, he stopped and looked up at my hat, this very hat, and said, "Wow, you must be so brave." Whitaker smiled faintly at the memory, his usually stoic face breaking into a rare display of emotion. That moment stayed with me because it reminded me why I do what I do. It's not about standing still or looking impressive. It's about inspiring hope and trust in others. His story struck a chord with everyone in the room. Whoopi nodded slowly, her earlier jokes now feeling distant and trivial in comparison. She glanced at the audience, noticing how captivated they were by Whitaker's words. There was no trace of boredom or disengagement, only rapt attention. Encouraged by the response, Whitaker continued, delving deeper into the sacrifices demanded by his role. There are nights when the cold cuts through your bones and all you want to do is move, to stretch your legs or rub your hands together, he admitted. But you don't because you know that someone out there is counting on you to stay vigilant. And then there are days when the heat feels unbearable, and the weight of the uniform makes every step feel like a mile. But again, you persevere, because giving up isn't an option. Whitaker paused, letting his words sink in. Then with a note of pride in his voice, he added, "It's not just about physical endurance, though. It's about mental strength, too. You learn to block out distractions to focus on the task at hand no matter what. That discipline becomes second nature after a while." As he spoke, the audience began to see him in a completely different light. No longer was he merely a figure in a red tunic and bearskin hat. He was a symbol of resilience, dedication, and selflessness. Whoopi, sensing the transformation taking place, decided to pivot the conversation entirely. She leaned forward, her tone now serious and respectful. "Captain Whitaker," she began, her voice softer than before. "Thank you for sharing that. I think many of us forget, or maybe never fully realize, the depth of commitment it takes to do what you do. Can you tell us more about what drives you? What keeps you going when things get tough?" Whitaker nodded appreciatively, clearly touched by her sincerity. "It's the sense of duty," he replied without hesitation, "knowing that I'm part of something bigger than myself. Whether it's protecting the monarchy, representing my country, or simply being a source of reassurance for someone passing by, it's all connected. Every day I remind myself that my actions, even the smallest ones, matter." He went on to describe a specific instance when his unit was called upon during an emergency situation. Without revealing sensitive details, he painted a vivid picture of teamwork, quick thinking, and unwavering resolve. "We didn't hesitate," he said. "Not because we weren't scared, but because we knew it was our responsibility to act." In those moments you realize that the training, the discipline, it all comes together for a reason. By now, the EO audience was completely engrossed. Some listeners wiped away tears, moved by the stories of sacrifice and courage. Others sat in awe, marveling at the level of dedication required to uphold such a demanding role. Even the co-hosts, who had initially joined in on the playful banter, now listened intently, their expressions reflecting admiration and respect. Whoopi seized the moment to address the elephant in the room. Turning to Whitaker, she said, "Earlier, I joked about whether you ever crack a smile or let loose. Looking back, I realize how unfair that might have sounded. You're not just standing there for show, you're embodying a tradition, a legacy, and that deserves far more recognition than I gave it." Her admission drew murmurs of agreement from the audience. Whitaker, however, remained gracious. "Thank you for saying that," he replied with a slight nod. "Humor has its place, and I appreciate the lightheartedness you brought to this conversation. But I also believe that understanding goes a long way. If sharing my experiences helps bridge that gap, then I consider it time well spent." With each passing minute, the interview grew more meaningful. Whoopi steered the discussion toward broader themes, asking Whitaker about the lessons he'd learned throughout his career and how they applied to everyday life. His responses were insightful, offering nuggets of wisdom that resonated with both the live audience and viewers at home. By the time the segment reached its midway point, it was clear that something extraordinary had unfolded. an unscripted moment of connection and mutual respect that transcended the boundaries of humor and entertainment. As the applause swelled, once again, this time filled with genuine appreciation, it was evident that the interview had taken a powerful turn. What had started as playful teasing had evolved into a heartfelt exploration of service, sacrifice, and the human spirit. And, though the segment was far from over, the foundation had been laid for a truly unforgettable conclusion. As the interview continued, the atmosphere in the studio had transformed entirely. The earlier playful banter and jokes felt like a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of respect and admiration for Captain James Whittaker. Whoopi Goldberg, who just moments ago had been leading the charge with her quick wit, now approached the conversation with genuine curiosity and humility. She leaned forward slightly, her demeanor softer, her questions more thoughtful. "Captain Whittaker," she began, her tone sincere, "you've shared so much about the sacrifices and discipline that come with your role. But I'm curious. What keeps you grounded? How do you stay connected to yourself when you're constantly embodying this larger-than-life symbol of tradition and duty?" Whittaker paused, considering her question carefully before responding. "That's a great question," he said with a small smile. "The truth is, it's not always easy. There are days when the weight of the uniform feels heavier than usual, not just physically but emotionally. But what keeps me grounded is remembering why I chose this path in the first place." He went on to explain that his motivation stemmed from a deep sense of purpose. "I joined the Royal Guard because I wanted to make a difference, however small. Whether it's standing watch outside Buckingham Palace or participating in ceremonial events, every action has meaning. Knowing that I'm contributing to something greater than myself helps me stay focused. And beyond that, it's the people around me, my fellow guards, my family, and even strangers who take a moment to thank us, that remind me of the impact we have." Whoopi nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by his response. "That's beautiful," she said. "It's one thing to talk about duty and service, but hearing you describe it so personally really puts it into perspective. I think a lot of us could learn from that mindset." Encouraged by her openness, Whittaker opened up further, sharing lighter moments that humanized his otherwise rigid public image. He spoke about the camaraderie among the guards, describing how they would share stories and laughter during breaks. "People might be surprised to know that we're not robots," he joked, eliciting warm chuckles from the audience. "We crack jokes, we tease each other, and yes, we even laugh. It's those moments of connection that keep us going." He recounted a particularly amusing incident involving a group of tourists who mistook him for a statue. "They were taking pictures and posing next to me, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actually standing there," he recalled with a grin. "One of them even tried to lean on my shoulder, thinking it was part of the display. When I finally moved, they nearly jumped out of their skin." The audience erupted into laughter, delighted by the unexpected glimpse into his world. But Whittaker didn't stop there. He also spoke candidly about the challenges he faced, both physical and emotional. "There are times when the job can feel isolating," he admitted. "You're trained to suppress your emotions, to maintain that stoic presence no matter what. But inside, you're still human. You still feel joy, sadness, frustration, all of it. Finding ways to balance that is crucial." Whoopi seized the opportunity to ask a follow-up question. "How do you manage that balance?" she inquired. "What do you do when you need to let off steam or recharge?" Whittaker's answer was both practical and inspiring. "For me, it's about finding outlets," he explained. "Whether it's spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies, or simply taking a quiet moment to reflect, it's important to have spaces where you can be yourself. I'm fortunate to have a strong support system, friends, family, and colleagues who understand the demands of the job and offer encouragement when needed." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. Whoopi herself seemed reflective, as though she were drawing parallels between his experiences and her own life. "It's amazing how universal that advice is," she remarked. "No matter what we do, we all need those moments of authenticity and connection. Thank you for reminding us of that." The conversation then shifted to broader themes of resilience and leadership. Whoopi asked Whitaker about the qualities he believed were essential for someone in his position. "Discipline is key, obviously," he replied. "But equally important is empathy. You have to understand not just your own role, but also the roles of others, the people you're serving, the team you're working with, and the communities you represent. Leadership isn't about authority, it's about responsibility." This insight sparked a lively discussion about the importance of empathy in everyday life. Whoopi shared her own experiences of navigating challenges in the entertainment industry, drawing parallels between Whitaker's military discipline and the perseverance required in creative fields. "At the end of the day, it's all about showing up," she said. "Whether you're standing guard at Buckingham Palace or hosting a talk show, it's about giving your best effort and respecting the people around you." The audience hung onto every word, captivated by the exchange. What had started as a humorous segment had evolved into a rich dialogue about values, purpose, and the human experience. Even the other co-hosts, who had initially played supporting roles in the interview, chimed in with their own reflections, adding depth to the conversation. As the segment neared its conclusion, Whoopi took a moment to express her gratitude. "Captain Whitaker, I want to thank you, not just for being here today, but for everything you've shared with us. You've reminded us that behind every uniform, every title, every symbol of tradition, there's a person with hopes, dreams, and struggles. That's something we should never forget." Whitaker smiled warmly, visibly touched by her words. "Thank you, Ms. Goldberg," he replied, "and thank you to everyone here today. If sharing my story helps people see the humanity in what we do, then I consider it a privilege." The audience erupted into applause, this time filled with genuine appreciation and admiration. Gone were the giggles and teasing from earlier. Instead, there was a palpable sense of connection and understanding. As the cameras panned across the room, it was clear that the interview had left a lasting impression, not just on Whoopi and her co-hosts, but on everyone present. In that moment, the studio felt less like a television set and more like a space for meaningful conversation. The playful energy that had defined the beginning of the segment had given way to something far more profound, a shared recognition of the sacrifices and dedication that underpin seemingly ordinary roles. And while the interview was coming to an end, its impact would linger long after the credits rolled, an inspiring reminder of the power of empathy, respect, and storytelling. As the interview approached its final moments, the energy in the studio had shifted dramatically from where it began. The playful teasing that once filled the air had been replaced by a profound sense of connection and mutual respect. Whoopi Goldberg, now fully immersed in the depth of Captain James Whitaker's story, took a moment to reflect on the journey they'd shared over the past hour. Her usual humor was still present, but tempered with sincerity, a testament to how deeply his words had resonated with her. "Captain Whitaker," she began, her voice warm and reflective, "I have to say something. When you first walked onto this stage, I saw the uniform, the hat, the posture, everything that makes people think of the Royal Guard as almost untouchable, larger-than-life figures. But today, you've reminded me, and everyone here, that behind all of that is a person. A real, living, breathing human being who laughs, struggles, and sacrifices just like the rest of us." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the studio. It wasn't the kind of applause reserved for celebrity guests or viral moments. It was heartfelt, genuine, and full of gratitude. Whitaker nodded humbly, his expression softening as he absorbed the sentiment. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady, yet tinged with emotion. "That means a lot." Whoopi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and posed one last question, one she knew would leave a lasting impression. "If there's one thing you'd want people to take away from today's conversation, what would it be? What message do you hope stays with them long after this show ends?" Whitaker paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. Then, with the same quiet authority that had defined his responses throughout the interview, he spoke. "I'd want people to remember that every role, no matter how big or small, has value. Whether you're standing guard outside a palace, teaching children in a classroom, or working behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly, your efforts matter. And more importantly, don't forget the power of understanding. Take the time to see the person behind the job, their hopes, their challenges, their humanity. That's how we build bridges, not just between individuals but within communities. His words hung in the air, carrying a weight that silenced even the most restless members of the audience. For a brief moment, the only sounds were the faint hum of the studio lights and the occasional sniffle from someone moved to tears. Whoopi exhaled slowly, visibly processing what he had said. "That's powerful," she admitted, shaking her head slightly as if trying to fully grasp the magnitude of his message. It's easy to look at someone in a uniform or any kind of role and reduce them to what we see on the surface. But when you dig deeper, when you listen, you realize there's so much more beneath. She turned to face the audience, extending the conversation beyond the confines of the stage. How many times have we judged someone based on their appearance or title without taking the time to understand their story? How often do we overlook the sacrifices others make because they don't wear their struggles on their sleeve? Today, Captain Whitaker has reminded us of the importance of looking closer, listening harder, and appreciating the unseen efforts that shape our world. The audience responded with another round of applause, this time accompanied by nods of agreement and murmurs of affirmation. Some clapped enthusiastically while others sat quietly lost in thought. Even the crew backstage, who rarely interacted directly with guests, found themselves pausing to reflect on the lessons shared during the segment. Whoopi then decided to bring the conversation full circle, addressing the earlier jokes and teasing that had marked the beginning of the interview. With a self-deprecating chuckle, she said, "You know, I started off making fun of your discipline, your posture, your hat, all the things that make you instantly recognizable as a royal guard. And honestly, I didn't mean any harm by it. Humor is my way of connecting with people, of breaking the ice. But somewhere along the way I realized that maybe I was missing the bigger picture." She glanced at Whitaker, her expression open and vulnerable. "I joked about whether you ever laugh or let loose, but what I should have been asking is why you choose to stand so tall so proudly in the first place. Because now I see that it's not just about following orders or maintaining tradition. It's about representing something greater than yourself. It's about inspiring others, even if they never say thank you. And for that I owe you an apology." The admission caught Whitaker, and likely many viewers, by surprise. While it wasn't necessary, given the light-hearted nature of her earlier comments, Whoopi's willingness to acknowledge the line she may have crossed demonstrated a level of maturity and empathy that resonated deeply. Whitaker smiled graciously, waving off her apology with a gentle gesture. "No need for apologies, Ms. Goldberg," he replied. "Your humor brought joy to this room, and that's valuable in its own right. Besides, sometimes it takes a bit of laughter to open the door to understanding." The audience erupted into applause once again, this time louder and more sustained than before. It was clear that both Whoopi and Whitaker had struck a chord, not just with each other but with everyone watching. The co-hosts chimed in, sharing their own thoughts about the interview and expressing admiration for Whitaker's poise and wisdom. One of them remarked, "This has been such a powerful reminder that there's always more to someone's story than meets the eye. Thank you, Captain Whitaker, for letting us peek behind the curtain." As the segment drew to a close, Whoopi offered a final reflection. "You know, we started this interview thinking it would be fun and entertaining, and it absolutely was. But it became so much more than that. It became a lesson in humility, respect, and the beauty of seeing people for who they truly are. So thank you, Captain, for being here and for reminding us of what really matters." Whitaker stood up, towering, over the table in his iconic uniform, and extended his hand toward Whoopi. She shook it warmly, her smile genuine and heartfelt. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, cheering loudly as the cameras captured the moment. For Whitaker, it was a rare departure from protocol, but one that felt entirely appropriate given the significance of the occasion. Backstage, after the camera stopped rolling, Whoopi approached Whitaker once again. "You handled everything with such grace," she told him sincerely. "I'm going to carry today's lesson with me moving forward. Maybe next time I'll ask fewer jokes and more questions." Whitaker chuckled softly, replying, "And maybe I'll learn to laugh a little sooner." Their parting exchange summed up the essence of the interview, a meeting of two worlds, united by humor, curiosity, and ultimately, mutual respect. As Whitaker exited the studio, still wearing his bearskin hat and red tunic, the crew couldn't help but applaud him one last time. He waved graciously, disappearing into the bustling streets of New York City, but leaving behind a legacy of inspiration that would stay with everyone who witnessed the unforgettable episode. For the audience at home, the takeaway was clear. Behind every symbol of tradition, every uniform, every role, there is a person with a story worth hearing. And sometimes all it takes is a little laughter and a lot of listening to uncover the humanity that binds us all together.